I think we might be live. So I'm going to go ahead and welcome you, Susan. Thanks so much for being here. And thank you to everybody who's watching both live and after the fact. We welcome you all. So Susan, thanks for being here.
I am so excited, Claire. Thank you so much.
And by the way, everybody who's here, guess what? We had almost 700 RSVPs. So you are in a big crowd, which just makes me so excited. That means there just must be tons of people who want to know how to connect, how to build deep relationships. And you're right. You're right for showing up because relationships are everything. I could go on and on about that because I built a community, I built my whole business and my life on my relationships. But Susan is the master, I guess I should say the mistress of it. So we're going to get into her work, her book. But first, couple of lines of her bio just to sort of set the scene for today's chat. So Susan McPherson is a serial connector, seasoned communicator, and founder and CEO of McPherson Strategies, which is a communications consultancy focused on the intersection of brands and social impact. Really interesting. She is the author of The Lost Art of Connecting, The Gather, Ask, Do method for building meaningful relationships, which came out on March 23rd. So we are one of her first debut book events, which, as somebody who just came out with the book in January, you are in for a very fun ride. And beyond that, Susan has 25 plus years of experience in marketing, public relations, and sustainability communications. She speaks regularly at industry conferences and contributes to the Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, and Forbes. First question right off the bat. What does it mean to be a serial connector?
Well, first of all, thank you, Claire. Thank you to the Ladies Get Paid community. I am completely honored and blown away. And I also just want to take a moment and honor Claire having launched a book in January and now just 2 weeks in. It is one of the hardest things one can ever do. And I've never had babies, but I have a feeling that the pain and suffering that went into the book is somewhat similar. So what does it mean to be a serial connector? I grew up in a household where both my parents every morning, and this is in the late 60s, early 70s, I'm 56 years old, they would be literally at the breakfast table with 5 local newspapers and yesterday's New York Times, because in those days, the New York Times came the next day if you lived in upstate New York. And they would be clipping and cutting and then running over to their typewriters and manual typewriters and saying, thinking of you, cousin Harry, thinking of you, colleague Joan, and putting them in envelopes and popping them in the mail. So that was my entire upbringing. I assumed everybody did that. And of course, fast forward into the reality of what we're living in, even in the 90s when there was internet, all of a sudden I could do it in real time. So I have literally made what was part of my upbringing, part of my calling card. And what I have done and now have written a book on is all about the ways to go ahead and build meaningful relationships. And notice I don't say networking, and we can get into the difference, but it is really all about leading with how can I help? How can I support you? And by doing that, you're actually helping yourself.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a perfect segue into why not networking. Why stay away from that word? Was that even a question mark for you in terms of what the book would be called, or did you know from the very beginning this is a word we don't want to use?
Well, I'm not anti-networking. Don't get me wrong. We definitely, we need networking in our lives, and obviously this past year it's been very, very challenging. But that notion of walking into a room or an online room with 150 people and literally meeting as many people as you can and exchanging cards and connecting on LinkedIn and then never remembering who they were or what you talked about, that is not what my book is about. Okay. My book is about literally having 2 or 3 at that event conversations, meaningful conversations where you actually listen and learn what is important to someone else, make note of it, mental or handwritten or typed or however, and then actually following up the next day, the next month, the next year, and then continuing that throughout your life. So I hope that makes sense, the differentiation. We will always have to network, okay? And for introverts, I know that can be incredibly scary, and I understand. The beautiful thing is what I'm talking about is almost like the power of threes. When you walk into an online room or walk into a proverbial I call them chicken dinner, rubber chicken dinner rooms, convention halls, conference rooms, gala dinners. Think of it this way: meet 3 people, learn 3 things, and share 3 things. And that way, if you're shy or introverted, it's palatable, it's tolerable. And actually, you'll walk away and you'll remember, because you're not talking to 25 people.
Why write the book?
Well, it's a good question. And I don't know. No. Good question. Now, over the years, lots and lots of people said, Susan, you're so good at introducing people. You're serial connector. How do you do it? And there were 2 kind of linchpins that kind of put me over the edge. One, believe it or not, a friend of mine about 4 years ago was telling me that when she dropped her 10-year-old and 12-year-old off at the bus stop, and she would hug them goodbye, and then they would proceed to get up on the bus and sit in their respective seats, their heads went immediately down. Not only the 2 of them, but every other child on the school bus. And I thought back to myself. Now, granted, I don't have amazing memories of bus rides. Believe me, there were bullies and nasty people. But I also would talk to my neighbors and my friends and catch up on, what they did the day before or what have you. So that was kind of like, this is not good. And 2, I started to see all of us, including myself, measure my success from a from a connective tissue to others by the number of followers and likes and clicks. And I realized, wait, that's wrong too. And in 20 years, the platforms from which we're measuring are going to be completely different. And then lastly, and this might be very important for a lot of the entrepreneurs in the audience, my business is now almost 8 years old. I founded it at age 48. And 7 of the 8 years that I can look at, revenue and growth, 98% of our business has been inbound. That was a aha moment, because it meant that all those meetings that I took in my 20s and 30s, and people that I met and people that I introduced, and nonprofits that I helped support, whether through volunteer or when I could write checks, those people came back around. And it wasn't like when I was 25 or 35 that I thought, 25 years, I'm going to have a company and I'm going to come calling. Like, it wasn't even part of the equation. So I thought, you know what? I have some info that I can share.
Oh yeah. And just to mention off of the word networking, for those of you all who feel like that has a bit of like a sleazy transactional connotation, I would say let's replace the word network with connect or community, right? Your community building. Right, because I think, and this is sort of what you're saying, it sounds like, is there's a pay it forward that happens. It happens over time, right? You're not reaching out to people when you need them. That's not the beginning of the relationship. It's sort of a natural evolution, or should be. For those people who are, I see this as sort of 2 things. One, you have to believe that you are worthy of connecting with others. So there's kind of questions about, well, what do I talk about myself? Or I'm maybe a new graduate and I don't feel like I've done anything impressive, or I don't like my job, right? So how do I sort of present myself? And then there's the more like logistical, where to find people, how to stay in touch, maybe even what to say. But maybe let's begin with some of those internal blockers, if they're there. And if you've also experienced them yourself, or with people you've met, if you have any stories of, I feel uncomfortable.
I always feel uncomfortable.
Okay.
I'm not even 5 feet with heels. Okay.
Yeah, very small.
Yeah. My license says I'm 5 feet. So when I would walk in the room, no one would see me. I mean, at all, like head over shoulder. No. But I will quickly explain the methodology in the book, because I think it'll help answer some of your questions. And obviously, if you do read the book, it goes into a lot more detail. But I know our time is limited, so I want to be somewhat brief. The book is divided into 3 sections: gather, ask, do. The gather section is something I want everybody in the audience to just, first of all, think to yourself. Let's take 15 or 20 seconds. What is a meaningful connection to you? Okay. Just think about that, because what it is to me might be very different than what it is to Claire, what it might be to Ashley, and to everyone else here. So just think about that for a second.
And question, now I'm like, okay, now I have a question for that. So does this need to be, or should we be thinking in terms of personal or professional, or it's actually either, and that's sort of the point?
Well, and again, this comes a lot in the book. There is no work, or there's not a work Susan and a personal Susan. Right. And the reason why is because I got too tired trying to be 2 people.
Ah,
And I found myself to be a lot more efficient if I worked on being the best Susan I could be rather than the best private Susan and the best public service Susan.
good. Good. I'm glad I asked that because people have correct because they feel so exhausted. And I think in large part it is because they feel like they have to maybe have two different worlds or two different selves.
Simplify. We're all about simplifying. All right. So once you have your thought of what a meaningful connection is, and it will change throughout your life, no doubt, then I want you to think about what is it the community that you want to surround yourself with. Okay. And when you think about that community, I want you to think about what are your goals over the next 4 years, 4 months, 4 weeks, and how can that community help you get there? All right. And I also want you to think about how do you want to try to push the boundaries on that community so that community doesn't look just like you, sound just like you, same age just like you. And lastly, and this is something, Claire, you just asked, and that is, what is your chief differentiating factor? What is your secret sauce that you can offer up to that community? And for those of you who are just out of college or at your first job or approaching retirement, you may think sometimes, I don't have, but I will bet you my fanny's bottom, whatever. I'm trying not to swear on these calls, that you have secret sauces, many of them. And this is part of this gather exercise so that you can actually be able to enunciate and articulate. So that's the gather phase. The ask phase is not initially what you think, because when we think of ask and being women, we often don't ask for what we want, deserve, and need. Okay. And that's very important. But in this instance, it's about learning to ask the right questions of others and those you are interacting with so you can learn more about them and what makes them tick and how inevitably, when you listen carefully, you can be helpful to them. And that's when you get to the do. And that is when you can be indispensable, reliable, trustworthy, the type of person, both personally and professionally, that is the best person to be. Now, before everybody thinks, oh my God, it's so exhausting, this is not something you have to do every day. But this is a way to kind of think about how to get the things you want in life, but also go through in such a way that when you support others, when it comes time that you need help, you have a village that will be at your disposal.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Did you read Give and Take by Adam Grant, by any chance?
Yeah, in fact, I used to run for 10 years on Twitter. I ran something called CSR Chat, which was corporate responsibility chat. And it was all about getting people in corporate responsibility to connect. Mm-hmm. And when I read that book, I was like, I got to have him on the chat. And I had already written about, but don't tell Adam this. Although Adam's in my book, I interviewed him for this. His notion about the more meetings you take, the more efficient you get, mm-hmm. I take to the next level. And my theory is the more people you meet in your life, the bigger your bag of tricks is. And I'm being silly, but the point is that means you have that many more resources from which to tap. Mm-hmm. When you come to me, Claire, and says, I need somebody who's a climate change expert. Chances are I will know that person. So I don't have to do the deep research. And I'm not trying to be lazy. I'm just saying, like, everyone you meet is a conduit to not only someone else, something else, but something you learn about yourself. Yeah. And it's powerful. But yes, I love Adam and I love that book. Remarkable.
Yeah. And for those who are watching and wondering, it was the first time I ever heard articulated how making connections for others actually expands your own network and your, quote, social capital. But, and sort of Susan has hit on this before here, it's when we think about networking and even hearing words like social capital, right, it starts to sound really business-like and transactional, right? And we want to get away from that. But, and I'm curious for you, Susan, being strategic is not mutually exclusive with being authentic and genuine, but how do people start thinking strategically? Or should they not? Should they just say, I just want to try to meet as many people as possible, be genuine, and see what happens? Like, what place does strategy have in all of this, if at all?
Sure. No, and that's part of the gather exercise. It's being strategic and thinking about What is the community you want to build so that you can get to your goals? And the goal may be a new job. The goal may be raising funds for your startup. The goal may be you know, want to get on a for-profit or nonprofit board. So what is the community that you have to surround yourself with? And it's not about going broad, although that could be, but it's really about also tapping into your existing community.
Okay.
And sometimes I think we don't really realize how valuable our existing community is. Like, you know, during doing research for this book, I realized, you know, you're our own neighbors. I mean, those of us, I'm in Brooklyn, and for years I didn't know my neighbors, but because of this pandemic, obviously I became, we focus so much more on local entrepreneurs, local shop owners. Everyone has value, and everyone offers something up. But to keep you from becoming a spinning wheel, it's important to think about what your personal and professional goals are and how that community can be leveraged in a way. But remember, you're going to be leading with how you can help others so that they can then help you.
Right. Okay. That is good to remember. Tapping into existing networks. I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I think oftentimes when we imagined networking or, expanding our network, it seems like I have to go and connect with people I've never met before, which is also quite exhausting. So what do you mean by tapping into the folks you already know? How do you do that?
Well, your colleagues, other members of Ladies Get Paid, whatever communities you are part of. If you are a volunteer for nonprofit organizations, which I highly recommend, to not only tap into your own community, but to meet others, and generally people who may not be exactly like you, your neighbors, and I'm not suggesting, I mean, LinkedIn, Facebook, all these networks are helpful. It's a matter of how you leverage them and not make them about, I'll back up. I mean, I can't tell you, and I'm sure a lot of us get these like sales emails from on LinkedIn. And I've been laughing because this week, my book kind of went out into the ethosphere. And granted, I don't expect everybody to know I have a book coming out, but if somebody's going to approach me and want to like spend time with me, it is so easy for them to like Google me or look me up on Instagram. I mean, they could do that before they pitch me or reach out to me and say, "Oh, congratulations on your book." And you know what? I might be a little more inclined to take the meeting or take the call. And again, these are just little tips. In the 90s and in the 80s, when I came of age professionally, if I needed to find out about somebody before reaching out to them, I had the Yellow Pages, I had Encyclopedia Britannica, and I usually had to go through a secretary. Okay. Wow. It is so easy now.
Yes, no excuses. No, the access is insane. But talk to me a bit about the cold outreach, though, because I do get asked that a lot. I always say cold outreach is great if you do it right. So maybe even thinking about if there's somebody you reached out to cold and a relationship came out of it, and or a time when somebody maybe reached out to you that you didn't know, but really got you, this is a person I do want to connect with. Curious if any stories come to mind.
Well, first of all, I always, when I reach out to someone cold, I do my research first. And I do I go and look at them on LinkedIn, or I'll definitely look at Twitter to see if, they're going off about something that happened that day. And maybe I don't want to reach out that day. But the thing is, you can also even know if they have children by looking at their Instagram, if it's a public, okay? And I always lead with something that is happening, that is present. And I always lead with, I love blah, blah, blah. I'd love to find out how I can be helpful to you. And here are a few ways. And if you do your research, you can, and not everybody responds to that. I mean, there's a lot of people who probably think, oh my God, she's crazy. Like, why is she leading with, there's got to be a hidden agenda. But generally speaking, if you make it about, the other person and be sincere about it. I mean, I'm not trying to be manipulative. That can be hugely empowering. I do have a wonderful story that I think proves that sometimes when we do get the inbound ones that may be like off the beaten path, or, we're busy, which will make you it'll blow your mind. In 2017, I got an email from a friend, a good friend, not a, bestie of any manner. And it said, Susan, a friend of mine wants to get into a refugee camp tomorrow in Greece. Can you help? Now, for the audience, one of the boards I serve on is the US arm of the UN High Commission for Refugees. So it wasn't so far out there.
Okay.
Just okay.
What a conversation starter.
But 2:30 in the afternoon, midday, McPherson Strategies, clients, all sorts of work, emails blowing up. And I see this and I think to myself, oh, the last thing the world needs is, and he was a filmmaker, the last thing the world needs is another documentary about refugees that no one's going to see. Mm-hmm. And to be honest with you, it's not easy to get into a refugee camp. Mm-hmm. And this was, of course, in the midst of the Syrian crisis. But you know what? I just decided, I have 15 minutes. I'm going to make a few calls. I got him into the refugee camp. He went the next day. And I learned a week later that he was not a documentary filmmaker. He was a big time Hollywood narrative filmmaker. And he had done a number of Tom Cruise films. And that experience in the refugee camp totally opened his eyes. And he became this passionate refugee supporter and of causes. 4 months later, I get an email from a friend who is on the board of the organization CARE. CARE is another NGO that works on global poverty issues. And she wrote to me and she said, Susan, help. I need to find a filmmaker or two that can go to the Syrian border and teach Syrian youth how to make movies to tell their story of how they fled. Well, guess what? I had Brant Anderson. I reached out to him. Not only did he say yes, but he brought 8 filmmakers with him, and they went and spent 2 weeks at the Al-Sarraq camp on the Syrian border in Jordan. And those children, they were teens, I guess. The experience was so successful that a foundation called the Epic Foundation funded a film academy that continues to help youth at this camp who are still, there's still a refugee crisis, and there will be. And it gets even better. He went on to not only fund CARE and UNICEF and UNHCR, but he went on to make a beautiful narrative feature film that Angelina Jolie saw and was so taken with it that she is now spreading it around the world. To various aid organizations to use for fundraising. So the moral of the story is, I came this close to saying no.
Wow.
And I don't want to take credit for any of that goodness.
I have goosebumps. I'm like, can you see it through? I have goosebumps, right? Because all it takes is just one, it can often take just one email or one person.
What I would have missed out on, not only, the good that happened, but just the personal experience of watching this all happen over a few years. I'm not a Hollywood person. I probably wouldn't know Angelina. Well, maybe yes, I would.
Yes,
but you live in LA. It's a very different, right? But to me, the moral or the magic of that is we just don't know what we don't know, and assumptions can be so wrong sometimes. All the assumptions I had were wrong. And I'm just so glad that day that I got off my ass and I did something.
And just for cold emailing for yourself, is there, at this point, you've been kind of sowing the seeds of relationships over time. And now, it really seems like, and I'm similar to you in this, is that we're the 6th degree, right? That game of 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, right?
Guess what? I know Kevin Bacon. I spent Thanksgiving at Kevin and Kira's house in 2003 when I moved to New York City from Seattle, and I didn't know anyone. So,
and did you tell him? Were you like, I'm the 6th degree of Kevin Bacon or whatever that game is? I don't know.
Well, everyone in your audience is 1 degree.
That is so wild. Yeah. Did you ever feel like, when was an outbound that you had to do, or time where you were, was there ever a time?
Oh, well, to reach out to people that I don't know?
Yeah. Or did you always get introductions?
Look, as an entrepreneur, you have to. No doubt. But I have found over 30 years of, working professionally, that if I lead with, how can I be helpful to the other person? My chances of the response goes up exponentially. And that was probably part, and for those again who will read the book, some of that was rooted in sales training that I had in my early career, as well as I was a researcher, which was like right below a reporter for USA Today in the 80s, meaning I had to learn the art of asking questions and being inquisitive. And that I honestly think has given me grounding to be able to do those open emails. But there's no secret sauce. I mean, there's no magic to it, but it make like if you make the email or the phone call or something that is a bit more inquisitive about the other person, the likelihood of that person getting back to you exponentially goes up.
When you said sales, and I am gonna, and everybody watching, you all submitted fantastic questions. So I'm gonna get to those in just a minute.
I'm talking too much. So
No. This is for you. Sales. So what did you learn from your sales training that has now been helpful in what you do and in writing this book? And then after that, this question I got specifically about sales, how do I build a relationship that I can then turn into a sale or encourage referrals from others for freelancing? So maybe let's first talk about kind of the foundations of what it takes to do sales and what you learned. And then maybe we can address this question that somebody submitted.
Well, typically when we think of a salesperson, the connotation that comes to mind, is the old like used car salesperson, that kind of thing. And honestly, a true good salesperson is somebody who understands somebody's needs and then responds in kind and solves their problems. Okay. I mean, if we peel back all the layers, and the only way you can understand what people's needs are is if you ask them, and if you really get to know them. And the same with fundraising. The same, whether you're raising money for a startup or raising money for your nonprofit. You have to really understand what is important to the other individual. In the early 90s, I was tasked with managing a sales territory for a company called PR Newswire in Orange County, California. And we were not the known company. There was another company called Business Wire that everyone knew. And when I would pick up the phone and call people wouldn't take my call because they never heard of us. So one of the ways that I determined I was going to break this kind of, kept getting the door slammed in my face, is where I came up with, instead of FOMO, which is fear of missing out, I came up with JOMO, which is the joy of meeting others. And what I did was I invited the 3 people I knew professionally, which was, all I knew. I had just moved from Washington, D.C. to, of all places, Newport Beach. And the 3 people that I don't know, I'd met in line at the grocery store or what have you. But no, I mean, in the profession, in the public relations profession, I asked them to come for coffee, and I asked them to each bring one person. And within a few months, we had 80 PR professionals that regularly would get together every month. And that is when it became this notion of, if you want to be successful from a sales perspective, you want to be a convener. You want to be the person known as, the person who's going to make shit happen. Okay. Yeah. So that was a very early lesson. I was probably 25, 26 at the time, in this notion of when you can start convening, you then can be the sales leader or the leader. And it's very different from when we think of like salespeople, right? Because what happened is it became the place to go. And if you wanted to be part of the public relations scene, you needed to be at this monthly gathering, right? So I don't know if I answered the question.
No, you did. You did. Yeah. How do people do that in the digital age? Or, and I'm sure these are the questions you're getting asked all the time. Does everything in the book translate online? Which I'm sure it does, but maybe talk to us a little bit about how that story can be sort of replicated or, attempted now.
Well, and I think it's important for me to say, when I wrote this book, the pandemic was not even part of, our lexicon. Right. And writing this book during a global pandemic, when I was the loneliest I've ever been in my life. I have no partner, no kids, no parents. So I have been actually alone for 12 months. And as Claire knows, I am not an introvert. I mean, you can probably tell, but it has been painfully lonely. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I have my health, I've had my livelihood, so I don't want to even go down. I mean, so many people suffered, but the thing is to put myself in a book, to write a book about connecting during that was a very emotionally challenging position to be in. But obviously that meant I had to take everything that I had professed to the online world because that's all we had. All right. All those clicks and likes and things that I was like saying we needed to move away from now was all we had. But what I have found, and I think many of us in the room have seen, we have gotten much more intentional about our digital communications. We are much more mindful. And we have gotten very good at using the chat function when we're in Zoom rooms or Microsoft Team rooms. And when we used to be in regular meetings, you couldn't have a side chat with your colleague. You know, you would probably get in a little bit of hot water. Right. But now you can reach out to a colleague and say, are you doing okay? Is there anything I can be helpful to you on? Or do you have 10 minutes on Friday? I'd love to catch up via text or via phone, whatever is the mode that works for you. So I think in some ways, no, it's not going to replace the in-person. But I do think because we now know how vitally important our connections are, we're not going to go back to this kind of like, just, it's all about the numbers. And we are going to take some of what we're doing now because it is helpful. Look, we have 600 people. That would never have happened pre-pandemic. I need to come to my book club, please. But I think there's going to be some hybrids. But I think it's, I looked at one of the questions was, you know, how do we make this more of a habit, right? Like, how do we start being very intentional about our outreach? And my first question is, how did you make brushing your teeth a habit?
You just did it. And also you did it at a certain time. There's that, right? Like, so it becomes a ritual.
Yeah. So what about setting every day that you're going to text or WhatsApp or phone 3 to 5 people, personal or professional, and just say, I'm thinking of you. Or, is there anything you need? Or, hi, I'm here, which is what I do because I'm like so tired of being by myself.
Yeah.
But I mean, that takes all of 5 minutes and a couple of things happen. You spread joy. I mean, for most people, the person who doesn't feel joy when they receive that, you don't want to be sending them texts anyways. And 2, you get to feel joy yourself. So to me, that's a whole lot more fun than brushing your teeth.
Right. This is true. This is very true. Did I brush my teeth this morning? Yes, I did. Okay. Had to think about that for a second. Good time to move over to some questions that were asked before. Okay. Well, let's talk about networking when you're internal networking, which for a lot of women that I connect with, we, again, think of networking as it has to be meeting new people and it has to be outside of work, right? Well, actually, all of that is fine, but we need to be networking internally. And actually, maybe that's more important in a lot of ways, because then you find advocates who can amplify the work that you're doing and help you do better and move up. So what should I do if I'm new? I just joined the company. I mean, especially now in this digital age, how do you go about building a network, even though I want us to get away from the word, but sort of building a community of connections within a company, and maybe I don't know people?
Well, again, I would do that assessment. What is it that you bring to the table? Okay. In addition to, you know, all your skills professionally, but you know, what else? Maybe you're an amazing tomato soup maker, or, you know, maybe you know, before the pandemic, you visited Antarctica and you're an expert on penguins. I visited Antarctica. I'm not an expert on penguins, but, you know, think about things like that set you apart, right? And it is the type of thing, because you're a new employee, you have actually the right to reach out to people and say, hey, I'm new here. I'd love to learn a little bit about your role so that I can be helpful to you. And chances are, unless somebody is like a DICK, that person is going to be like, hey, that's kind of a nice approach. And not only that, when you put yourself in a position to learn other people's functions in a company, you are like completely helping yourself to be more successful, because you understand the broader like business at hand. Okay. And Therefore, you then add to your bag of tricks of things you understand. Okay. And unless you know somebody else's role and the challenges they face, you then can't be helpful to them, and vice versa. Because just by having that conversation, they're going to learn more about your job. So, to me, as scary as it may be, pick, once a week that you're going to reach out to 2 people at the company. And again, this much depends on the size and structure of the company. You can go, if there is an HR department, you could go to the HR department and say, you know what, it's in their best interest that you do this. And if they're not helping facilitate it, shame on them. But this is whether you are doing it online or when we're back in some semblance of normalcy, this will help you so much, whether you stay at that company or go to another company. Because to me, and again, I've been now working about 30 years, what has been such tremendous experiences is when I have been able to learn other functions than the functions I was good at. Not because I'm going to take them on, but because I can understand. And the greatest analogy I have is the years I used to waitress. And if I didn't understand what it was like to be in the kitchen, I couldn't be a successful waitress.
Oh, that's a good analogy. That's a really good analogy. Question from somebody, they said, this is going back, and I'm sorry, I'm looking on my phone because guys, we're doing a simultaneous. Susan and I are on Zoom. You're all on YouTube. The majority of people watching this are probably not doing it live. So there's a lot of tech going on. This question comes from Emily. She says, what should you do when you're talking with someone for the first time and ask them what you can do for them? And they say, nothing.
Well, look, that is going to happen. Okay. And first of all, that wouldn't be my question. I mean, I never, yes, I have said in this conversation that I lead with how can I help? But in the book, I have a chapter that has 10, I think maybe 11 questions that you can have in your ready to actually engage people in a more meaningful conversation. I can't see a show of hands, but I want everybody to think, how many times have you gotten into a Zoom room or a conference call and the de facto conversation goes to the weather?
Or just the pandemic?
Well, yes, yeah. But typically, like if we think back the last,
it's always the weather.
It's about the weather, right?
Always.
And, in 1985, I was a college junior, and I lived in Denmark with a Danish family. And I can't tell you, every month my Danish father would say to me, "You Americans, you always just fill the air with weather talk," and it has stuck with me, and it's true. So to me, when you are talking to someone, think about questions that are going to actually start to get that person to talk about themselves. Things like, if you could be anywhere in the world post-pandemic, where would it be and why? Or if you could solve one problem next week and you had the magical power to do it, what would it be? Okay. Tell me what your favorite food was as a child. And if you could recreate it, would you do so now? These types of questions are somewhat personal, but not personal, invasive personal. And they are the types of questions that will get people talking. And at that point, you could say, this year has been really tough. Are you finding anything of challenge? Is there anything I can be helpful? And you know what? If they say no, that's okay. All right. I mean, you're not going to force it. But the thing is if you have that kind of conversation, you can listen for hints or little nuggets of data that then you can respond, which is the do component, whether it that night when you get home, if we're back out in the world, or via email, and say, wow, I heard that I love that you loved hummus, because I love hummus. And by the way, there's this fabulous restaurant in your town that you ought to try. And why I joke, I'm being kind of silly, but when you let people know that you not only saw them, but you heard them, that is a powerful gift to give. And people will remember.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and it's so true. And even just offering support, people remember that. They remember when somebody didn't offer support. But one thing they won't remember is that you talked about the weather. So that's good.
Oh, it's and you're not going to follow up. What are you going to say? Oh, it was really interesting talking to you about the 70 degrees you're having in Cleveland right now.
Right. Here's a question from somebody who asked, how do you reconnect with former colleagues, old friends who you haven't spoken with in years while still feeling authentic? So maybe you haven't done the, hey, I saw this article, thought of you, right? But everybody listening, now we know that is a way to stay in touch. It doesn't need to be huge updates or anything like that, right? But let's say you've done none of it.
Sure,
You
sure.
want to reach out again.
Which is normal, by the way. Okay.
But we're not alone in that. But yeah, what do we do when we're in a situation like that?
Well, first of all, this past year, we've been on a level playing field. Everybody has had some semblance of grief. So it is a time where it is totally natural to pick up and reach out to people that you have, and you don't need any kind of quote unquote excuse. But a couple of thoughts. One, if somebody pops in your brain, do it. Don't, because these things sometimes just fleet, right? And it's like, oh, I'll get to it, and then you never do. So to me, like when it comes in, jot it down, because you may be, doing something else and you can't. And then look up the person, Google the person, get a little sense of what's going on in their life. So you have a reference point. So it doesn't just sound like you're, I'm going to just say it, a moron, and just being like, oh, hey. And then I think identify the elephant in the room. Okay. And not that you're at fault, but you could say, I have been remiss in staying in touch, and I want to reach out. And I happen to notice you just wrote a book, and I wanted to congratulate you. Do you have time in the next few weeks? I'd love to just catch up or find out what is new for you, and if there's anything that I can be helpful with. Or don't even, forget the helpful, but if you do that little bit of kind of uncover and then identify I always say the elephant in the room. I mean, I don't know where that came from. Like, I've never had an elephant in my room. Have you?
I use that too. You're right. Now we all have to write. Okay. So somebody who's watching right now, go ahead, quickly Google and let us know. Put it into the chat. Okay.
Where did that
We'll
come
find
from?
out. By the end of this, we will know.
But I do love elephants. I mean, if there was an elephant in my room, I would actually be really happy.
I think that's great. I think I say this also to women when you are interviewing or presenting or negotiating, like it is okay to start out by saying, I'm a little nervous doing this. And that's going to humanize you. And it also, it'll probably make the other person feel more comfortable too.
Well, and a couple of things come to mind there. First of all, when you go to an event, when we go back to events and you're by yourself and you're terrified because you're by yourself and you see someone else by themselves, go talk to that person, because guess what? That person is terrified. And chances are not, that person could be, I was going to say an elephant, but if she was an elephant, but that person could be, just not a very nice person. And we always take that chance. But you walk up to that person, chances are she or he or they are going to have a collective, like, oh, I'm not alone anymore. Okay. So that's one. Two, this past year, I have, as mentioned, been incredibly lonely. And I run a company. It's a tiny company. I'm hiring my 13th employee. But believe me, this was not the time that I was Superwoman. And I can't tell you how many meetings I would come with tears in my eyes. And I would say to my team, I was up all night crying. And I wasn't doing that to make them feel bad. I was doing that because that's who I was. And I wanted to give them the feeling that it's okay. We don't have to be Superwomen right now. In fact, no one is. I mean, we have this collective connection because we're all dealing with this challenge. And I will say, there were some people on the team that had never met in real life, yet they have to work together very closely. And that freed up people to allow themselves to be vulnerable. So what you just said, Claire, about, admitting you're scared or admitting that, luckily is a little bit more accepted today than it was in the 90s. If I showed up at a meeting in the 90s with tears or anything, I mean, I would get a red check, whatever the proverbial, like, bad. And so to me, this is back to that, as we feel safe, we can then be that much, we can connect on a deeper level.
Right. If you aren't doing this already, I would highly recommend writing an op-ed about what it was like to go through the pandemic and have this book and to be this person that you are and to experience the exact opposite. No, I mean, it's which is maybe it's like taking something that was so fucking difficult and then it's an interesting piece. So sorry to reduce you down to like an op-ed here, but it is fascinating.
I love it. I run a communications firm. I will take it from anybody.
Yeah, that's because I would definitely read that. Vulnerability. Is there ever sharing too much? Or, I mean, it's of course like read the room, or read the Zoom, who you're talking about to see your comfortability and like how much do you share about yourself, or even, the kinds of questions that you ask without being invasive. I know you mentioned that earlier. What's a balance that we can find? If and it's not one size fits all, but I figured,
No, and it is very personal.
Yeah.
What I have, the work we do is around corporate responsibility, and what has actually happened over the last 10 or so years is companies have become not every company, of course, but generally much more compassionate and empathetic. I mean, they still have a long way to go, but to me, the onus is on the leadership to help people feel more comfortable, and that means all people who typically marginalized citizens, underprivileged citizens, people who may not feel safe. So, but I also know that in many companies, people don't feel safe, right? So I would never expect people to do something that is uncomfortable. But I also put the onus on the leadership of the company to start figuring out ways to help people feel more comfortable. And studies after studies show that when teams are, and this is both virtual and in person, are more connected, they will actually be more productive. They'll be more innovative. People will stay at companies longer. So there is a business reason for leadership to do that. But I don't expect anyone to feel safe if the leadership isn't making it possible. Okay. Mm-hmm. But I think for each of us, this is, and I don't mean to keep like going back to the book, but that phase of gather is think about what you want to accomplish and think about what you have to offer, and always use that as kind of like your guiding principle, because when you have special sauces and chief differentiating factors, that can help you feel more when you walk in that room. I am somebody, right? And believe me, it's not easy. And it took me to be in my 50s to actually be able to like be confident. So I'm not suggesting that this is like something you can just like, oh, I'm going to be super connected. I will just tell you one really quick funny story, because in 2008, I went away with 7 girlfriends on a retreat. And the goal of the retreat was to come up with our elevator speeches. Basically, who we were. And that weekend, we told each other that we could not leave this beautiful home in the Catskills until we came up with our, what our mantra was. And it was that weekend that I came up with Susan McPherson as a serial connector. And when I said it, I peed in my pants. I was like, oh my God, that's ridiculous. Like, who says that? And then 3 or 4 years later, when I was being introduced onto a stage and they said, well, we welcome Susan McPherson as serial connector, I still wanted to pee in my pants. But fast forward 2021, I've now written a book on it. So I think the lesson is, when we do find what we really feel we can own and really relish about a special skill or something special we have about ourselves, sing it to the world. Mm-hmm. And it will help you when you are making connections with other people.
Yeah. And that, to know, I mean, from your story, I mean, it clearly took time, right? And because we're constantly, I mean, we have to have experiences to understand ourselves in the world, right? And I mean, it was only recently, probably a few months ago, where I had a total aha moment about what my specialty was. Communicator. So, I am a communicator. And other things, but that then crystallized, like, a lot of the decisions that I make is through the lens of how I'm communicating to people. And anyway, just for those of you, like, yeah. And it takes time. So here's a question though that you've already a little bit answered, but I want to dig into a bit more, because this person is not sure what I can offer since I'm a novice. So she's new in a career field. She's looking for guidance and mentorship. There's some questions about cold outreach, which you've already spoken to here, but, I'm of course happy to add to help them in any way I can, but I'm not really sure what I can offer since I'm a novice. So any suggestion on how I can approach the situation, which I think is a little bit more of like, how do I understand my special sauce? Do you speak to that in the book at all?
Yeah, absolutely. And, the thing is remember, your special sauce doesn't just have to be your professional skills, because as you proceed professionally, much of the interpersonal skills that you develop will actually be helpful in your professional skills. And that's something that nobody teaches you in college or when you first get your kind of first job, because you're thinking it's all about what you're doing for work. But no matter what job you have, even if you're a programmer, you're going to have to deal with other people. So, I often, when young, like a 21 or a 22-year-old will say to me, I'm just fresh out of college, what do I have to offer? And I often say 2 words, TikTok. And I would start to think about, for instance, are you good at any social media platform? Because inevitably, and this is a generalization, but a lot of young people are better at some of the new technologies than somebody who's like ancient like me.
Better than me. I'm still like, what is this TikTok? I apparently got older too. So
No, but these are the things to think about. Like, don't just limit your secret sauce to, your professional skills. Do you speak a foreign language? Do you, have you been to a place in the world that you feel you could then share that information with? Like, these are things that actually are very unique and special that separate you from every single person. So I think, this is not going to be something like right off the top, but start thinking about what are the things are you a good painter? Are you a good artist? Are you a good writer? I promise you. Are you a good cook? Do you love collecting recipes? Like these seem like just hobbies and things like that, but they are what set you apart and give you things that you can be offering others.
And I would say don't take for granted your interpersonal skills. So if you are somebody who is empathetic or patient, or that counts. That counts. People, and to name that, it will become clear to you how you are best communicator, because those interpersonal skills will come through.
And a good listener, people are horrible listeners, and that is a skill that will help you for life. So don't discount it.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And people love talking about themselves. So you make a fantastic impression when you set them up with interesting, good questions. And then you can always follow up by email and say, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I know we only have about 5 minutes left. So let me just take a quick look at some of these other questions here. This is a little bit more of a negative one, but there's somebody at the office that they're not loving, but they, I guess it's a bit more of office politics here, but how do you maintain a good professional relationship with someone that you don't really like on a personal level?
Well, I can tell you that has happened many, many times in my life. And unfortunately or fortunately, you're in this weird situation. I have learned the best way to handle it is to be very direct and just say, again, back to the elephant in the room. I've got to come up with a new animal. But just say, we don't have the most remarkable relationship, but we do need to work together. So let's figure out how to make this best for both of us. And I realize that's terrifying, but if you do that and you document it, it's really important, because then if it does go south, you've made that, very direct and professional attempt at working on it. And if you then document it and things go south, you then have the recourse from which to potentially go to if you have an HR office or something. But to me, again, I think about all the tears and all the struggles over the years, that if I had just been like, what, just deal with it, I probably would have saved some, or there probably wouldn't be as many of these.
Question, I want to move in a year or two to a brand new area. I do not know how to make new friends anymore. I used to make friends a lot pre-COVID. Any advice on being, quote, the new kid as an adult and by your own choice?
I love that question, because I moved quite often throughout my professional career. And one of the first things I would do was get involved in local nonprofits in the cities that I ended up, or political campaigns or civic campaigns, because it was a great way to meet people who had, that cared, right? Which was for me very important. Now, depending on what your passions are, there's also things like ladies get paid. but there's so many virtual communities now, whether it's the We Suite or the List or the Riveter or the League of Badass Women. So to me, it's like, again, go back to what is it when you move to that community do you want to have happen? Also, Nextdoor, which is a great platform, is a great way to actually, when you get there, to like basically announce. It's like
Yeah.
you don't even have to bring a cake. You can just
Right.
say. But you know, my suggestion would be the nonprofits or civic organizations, and then some of these online communities, because we are going to eventually be back in some semblance of human connection. So now is the time to do these things so that when we do come back, you're that much more prepared.
Good story to illustrate this point of joining groups that share your values and interests, and then you can meet people who are like-minded. Ashley, my co-founder, actually did not found Ladies Get Paid. I founded Ladies Get Paid, and she just showed up. She came to every event, sat in the front row, consistently offered her support. And not just like, how can I support you? But she also just started to support. Can I make these introductions? And so I joke that she networked her way into, 50% of this business. So, it really goes to show that you can do this.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
There's
also, when you get involved in local nonprofits, you're going to meet people who aren't just like you also. So it does and people who have come from very different livelihoods, which is again really, really important for your personal and professional development.
right. Yeah, that's great. And the connection is that you both share an interest or a value, but you have different backgrounds or, different industries. And Adam Grant talks about this in his book, and I'm sure you do as well. And you've mentioned it, of just diversity being critical actually to the success of your network. This is not a question that I wanted to end on, but it is a question we got in the chat, and everybody has asked me this. And I'm going to have you just spell it out. With the pandemic and everyone online 24/7 and trying to stay connected, how do you get a new/old contact to open/respond to your customized/personalized email, LinkedIn, note, Instagram, DM? Thanks. I think the question here really is, what do you actually say to get somebody to open the email, if you can get that granular with us? I get asked this question thousands of times a day, and I'm sure you do too.
I wrap it with, how can I help?
Okay.
How can I be helpful to you? And it, most of the time, I mean, not all the time, I mean, nothing's perfect, but most of the time people respond to that. And if you think about it, as opposed to, hi, can you help me?
Right.
People are going to be a little less, I mean, no one's going to respond. I mean, it's not foolproof, but you will see a noticeable difference.
Yes, I agree. And I know that you've underscored that before, but we did just get that question. One suggestion I would make that's worked with some members and Ladies Get Paid and me is, before they've reached out, and I'm thinking of a few in particular, Jamie is a great example, Judy's a great example. These are women who share Ladies Get Paid events online. There was no outreach to me. It was just consistent promoting Claire wrote this book. I highly encourage you to, watch, went to the summit. It was great. And then when they reached out, which wasn't even to ask me for anything, it was just to introduce themselves, I already knew who they were, and I was grateful to them. So that is a place to start. It has worked for me. Absolutely.
Love that. I love that.
It's easy. And back to that question, there was that woman who said, well, what do I have to offer? Right. Well, this is a way you don't even have to ask permission. You already start sharing articles on LinkedIn that they've, posted, or just commenting, congratulations. Like, that is a way to express support.
Yeah. And I mean, social media is, I made a joke, a light of it, but it's a tremendous way to showcase others and to shine a light on others. And to me, that's a fabulous way to show up in the world.
Yes. Yes. Tell us about the book. I know, you gave the pitch in the beginning, but kind of why should somebody buy it? What you're excited for us to take away from it, how to find you, how to follow you, and how to support you.
Well, you can find me on all the socials at Susan McP1. All right. Somebody had already gotten Susan McPherson, so I had to go with something else. So Susan McP1, you name it. My company's name is McPherson Strategies, and the website is mcpstrategies.com. The book is I don't even know the name of my book, The Lost Art of Connecting, which is available at bookstores everywhere and anywhere. I would be honored and grateful if you decided to purchase it. It also makes a wonderful graduation gift, since there's a lot of tips and tricks on how to build your community in the way that you are wanting it to be, but most importantly, how to lead a life of how can I help rather than what I can get. I also want to put put out there, please feel free to connect with me on the various socials, LinkedIn, etc. I'm a little busy over the next few weeks, but I assure you I will get in touch. And I am happy to open doors for every single one of you, because that would be really disingenuous if I wrote a book about it.
I did not ask a question that I'm so glad you've stuck around with me a few minutes past. Why the lost art of connecting? Like, what have we lost?
Yes. Well, remember, the book was conceived 4 years before. And what I was harkening back was the days of my parents, when literally it was the typewritten, very heartfelt thinking of you, that deep, meaningful connection, rather than, oh, that person likes me, they must be connected to me. Okay. And what I was hoping to do, this was again before the pandemic, was how do we capture that again? And when you read the book, there's lots of ways, and everything from leading with how can I be of help? How can I be supportive? How do I show up and actually listen to people? Like this is the days of what we used to do before we got so addicted to our technology. So does that help?
It is a perfect pandemic title, though.
Thank
It's
you.
a perfect pandemic title.
I will tell you, I have never picked the right line at the grocery store. I've never won the lottery. I have never even won an award in my entire life, but I think I kind of got the book right at the right time.
Yeah. No, you did. You did. It was needed before, but it is desperately needed now. Susan, thank you. Thank you for being here. Little shameless plug for myself and my book, and Ladies Get Paid. So check me out. I'm the founder of Ladies Get Paid, Claire Wasserman. We are an educational platform. We are a global community. We got a book. Check out ladiesgetpaid.com/book. We also have a Slack group with 100,000 women in our Slack group, all free, ladiesgetpaid.com. Thank you to all of you for watching, both live and after the fact. Susan, you're fantastic. I wish you the best of luck with the book tour. It is a lot of fun. And I know that we miss seeing people in person, but there is something nice about being in my pajama bottoms. Did the top, definitely wearing pajamas and slippers. So that's also been a nice way to connect with lots of people, while also conserving energy, because we did get a lot of questions about the exhaustion of it all. But you've explained it well, where connecting and offering support does not need to be, it's not a heavy lift. And we need to, I think, if it is a heavy lift, then you're probably going to keep your network really small, which is,
That's okay. This is not a numbers game, honestly. Okay. And this is over the long haul. Okay.
Right.
I'm telling you from 30 years of experience. All right. And remember that 98% number. People showed up.
Right. And you wrote the book. Congratulations on that. Thank you so much to you, to everybody. And for those live, happy almost Friday. How about that? Woo!
And April, we're in.
April. Oh God, and it's April 1st. There's no joke here. No joke other than, there's no joke. You know what I wish was a joke? The wage gap. Wow, we could have done something sort of funny, tongue in cheek about that. All right. Best of luck to you, everybody watching. Stay well, stay safe, and we'll